So my first question, Carol Swinney, is tell me a little bit about your life before you got involved in the women's movement. Where did you grow up?
Okay.
What was your, growing up like?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. I'm a first urban generation in my family. My parents are from rural Tennessee. And so I grew up on the south side of Chicago, which is, at the time, known as the Black Belt, if you will. But it's an area where a lot of the great performers and black businesses, C.J. Walker, the black hair products person, it had a lot of history in that area. I grew up on South Michigan Avenue, which is where the police station now, the new one, is in that area.
And were you conscious of that history as you grew up?
Not so much. I mean, it was we were in a tenement, and tenement, for people who are not aware, is a building where there's only a handful of washrooms. So the sense of having a toilet in your own apartment is not something I grew up with. We had to share it with everybody on the floor. So there's a lot of sort of waiting and for people to come and go. But it was a different. I knew that was different, but I didn't realize it until my family was selected to move into CHA housing, and that was a major upgrade. And
how old were you then?
I was I was going into the third grade. So my dad really wanted us to move away from what was where CHA housing existed, which was Stateway Gardens. He didn't want us to be there, even though it was nowhere near what people realized what Stateway Gardens had become. But at the time, that was still a step up. But we moved to the west side, and then I went to Chalmers High School and started my elementary school career in that part of the city, 3rd through 8th, and then from there I went to Manly Upper Grade Center, and then from there went to, and then my parents were able to earn and save enough money to get the first little bungalow on the far south side in Roseland.
Wow.
So I grew up in Roseland, went to Harlan High School, and then eventually was off to college.
Was Roseland then mostly African American?
It was mostly African American, and an interesting thing too about our particular block or two is that a lot of people I grew up with in the projects, they all moved to Roseland. So I think that may have a lot to do with where homes were being sold for black folks for the most part, as opposed to people having the liberty to move wherever they wanted in the city of Chicago. So we all moved to Roseland, and then I went to high school, finished high school in that area.
And what did you think at the time you might become or want to be?
Well, I wanted to become a doctor. That was and I had a lot to do with the family I grew up in. I'm the oldest of 4, two of the youngest siblings had congenital birth defects. And so I spent a great deal of time in the hospital waiting rooms, waiting for my mom to settle whatever matters that she was trying to get resolved with doctors, and primarily at Michael Reese. So I was, as a result of being around the hospital so much, I thought, well, maybe, I really wanted to be a doctor. Plus, we had these TV shows on, these doctor shows on at the time that I watched.
Ben Casey.
Ben Casey. Oh, I love Ben Casey. He was my favorite. I mean, he was he was it. So that's how I wanted to live until I, became older and realized that I really didn't want to live a life where I was on call. But at the time, that was kind of they were my dreams. There were very few women role models at the time, other than teachers which was
Did your
fun.
mother work?
She did not initially, but she eventually got a job at the post office, and as someone who worked with the big mail bags. She wasn't a deliverer or carrier, but she was somebody who worked on a chute. But my mother eventually worked. My dad always worked in a box factory, yeah, both parents worked. Mom usually worked during the day, and Dad worked at night. So,
But you were saying there weren't sort of women professional, role models in professional
maybe
jobs.
nurses for the most part. And then my sister also had congenital birth defects. She was incontinent from the very beginning, and so Mom, eventually. Before she went to the post office, she got a job working at Mount Sinai Hospital, and was learning how to take care of an incontinent daughter, and which involved at that time using catheters, which weren't readily available in medical supply stores. So she had nurses who would kind of grab some and give her some saline solution, hypodermic needles, and then as a result, Mom taught me how to use that equipment. So when she wasn't around, and my sister would go into crisis, that I would be able to change her catheter.
A lot of responsibility.
Yeah, for a kid who was like almost 11 years old, 12. So it wasn't. I didn't have very many role models per se, but anyway, any role model I saw could have been on TV, but that was far and few between, especially African American role models.
So you graduated from high school.
Yeah, Harlan High School. And then went to Elmhurst College. It was one of those schools where I didn't give a lot of thought, but I had a good girlfriend who the two of us sat down and we just kind of looked at the college books and said, let's see, why don't you go here? And not knowing any better, I applied and got in. And I think I probably could have gotten in a much better school if I had known better, because I, was.
There wasn't any help from
There wasn't
high
any
school.
help. No, I was in the top 25 of the graduating class out of 500. So I could have gone to a better school. I'm sure he had good test scores, but anyway.
Had your parents been to college, or
No,
you were the first generation?
Yeah, I was the first generation, and my mom, and my dad both had rural high school diplomas.
But they supported the idea that you get an education.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something they wanted to see happen, although they couldn't contribute much to that happening, but that's what they wanted, and I was able to get into and graduate from Elmhurst College before I ended up getting married.
And did you have a career objective while you were at Elmhurst?
Still looking at medicine, although I kind of shifted towards the end of my career in college, and was looking more at psychology and the arts. And so I love the arts. I enjoyed it immensely, and I actually thought I could become a muralist. In fact, I painted a couple murals with a professor that are still up at Elmhurst College, and then as far as the psychology part, wasn't sure. Probably wasn't given the best advice, in terms of how do you get a master's degree, that sort of thing. Yeah.
So you got married.
Yes.
And then you went to work.
Yes, and that's at that point I started working in a factory. I was married to an activist, and
a labor activist.
A labor activist, and I thought, well, that's something I wanted to do. My parents, of course, were horrified and disappointed because I got my college degree, but I was looking for something that would energize me. And I think that one of the things I learned immediately as a union organizer was that I was not, respected, because I was a female. I think that men, as my husband,
in the union,
as my husband had far more respect, but I also felt that I had a good way with people. This is when I was working at Zenith at the time.
And was the plant organized, or was this an organizing
It was
drive?
It was a company union, and
Okay.
so I believe IBEW was trying to get in,
Okay.
as opposed to the company union, which is essentially sold people out. But I got my first job making $3 and something an hour, and I became very good at my assignments on the assembly line. 700 chassis were rolling off that assembly line a day, and I got very good at it. When I first started, my co-workers who were women would take parts of the various screws and bolts and stuff that I had to put on the chassis. They'd take it home and they would do hundreds of them at a time, and then they would sneak them back in and put it in my little box.
Why do you think they did that?
I think they wanted to see me succeed.
How did your experience at the plant inform your activism or your desire to continue to be an activist?
I learned to rely on people in a good way. I mean, people were eager to help, regardless of what they look like. Also, women. I learned to deeply appreciate women. It's not something. What they did for me, I can't imagine men doing for me. I had some problems on the line with men who were just ridiculous, wanting to hit on you and all that kind of stuff. And I found my voice in that situation. I had one guy who came in work just ripped, drunk, and was just trying to talk to me and was insulting me because I wasn't paying attention to him. And then I finally decided, I've had enough of you. And I remember picking up my stool and throwing it at him, and everybody was like, and I wouldn't have done that, unless I felt confident. And he was stunned, and left me alone after that. I literally went, ah! And so I think that just becoming empowered and feeling that I'm not alone. So that is one of the big lessons that I learned, and also feeling a sense of pride in my ability to do the work. And nobody was giving me anything.
And you left that job because?
Because of the pregnancy. Since I had my hands in silicone grease all day, and I was breathing soldering smoke, I decided that it's probably safer for me to not be there during the pregnancy.
And did you work again right after
Yeah,
that?
I did, briefly. And again, that's when the women rallied and gave me baby clothes that they had. And, so that was just a wonderful feeling of just being part of a sisterhood.
And how did you get involved in the ERA campaign in Illinois? How and when, I should say?
Well, it was towards the end of '81. My son was born in March of '81. So towards the end, I, thanks to unemployment insurance, I was able to collect. I had some time, and I wanted to get out of the house, and I decided I really wanted to work on something that I was passionate about. So I actually went to the office and said, "Look, I can do this. I'm not expecting any pay."
You went to Chicago Now.
I went to Chicago Now, and I think it was in the Monadnock building.
Yep.
And I knocked on the door and said, can I come in and do some volunteer work a couple days a week? And that's where I was, licking stamps and stuffing, mailers, flyers. And I did that for a while, and again, not with any anticipation of getting hired. And when they got extra money, that's when I was brought on staff.
So that was at the time that the national organization targeting 3 states put money and people into Illinois, and a job opened up.
Yeah.
And that's how you did that. What drew you to the ERA per se?
What's my read?
Yeah, I mean, what drew you? What made you want to volunteer in this particular campaign as opposed to?
Well, I knew it was
some other issues?
historic. I knew it was the final push. I knew of some of the difficulties, and it was something that I felt that I needed to be a part of. While I was certainly concerned about being the only black woman in the office at the time, that didn't bother me as much. I think that being a labor organizer, you may find more black men, but not necessarily any black women. So, I was fine with that, and I'm the kind of person who has been since that time in many situations where I'm the only one, but not the only female. And I think that just being around people, treating people as people, I gain a lot from those kinds of interactions, and so it was important to do that. The other person I need to do a shout out is, at the time, my sister-in-law was very much involved in the women's movement, and she's no longer with us, but she was involved in it was a Washington D.C. organization, and was doing public relations and fundraising for them. And so I, when I would visit her, visit the family, I was aware of, what she was attempting to do, and going to their meetings, their national meetings, and that's when I got a sense of, I met, Bella Abzug and also Gloria Steinem, and it was a true honor to be around people like that. I mean, I wasn't friends with them, but just observing them from afar, it was just fun to watch their.
Do you remember, just backing up for a minute, do you remember when you started thinking of yourself as a feminist and interested in feminist issues?
I can't say that I ever viewed myself as a feminist, because I just didn't see myself as a feminist, and maybe that's a racial thing, I don't know, but I did see myself as someone who believed in equal rights. And so that was the hook for me, as opposed to the feminist part for me. I know my sister-in-law definitely saw herself as a feminist, and we would have conversations about, but I just never said I'm a feminist too.
What issues that the women's movement was addressing, besides the Equal Rights Amendment per se, were issues that you cared about particularly?
I think, in terms of equal pay, family, the need for families to be supported, those were important issues for me. But they were very relevant because I had a very young family, and having constant childcare problem. Those are the kinds of things that I was facing on a daily. Yeah, I was facing on a daily basis, and I'm sad to say that a lot of those problems have not been resolved over the years.
But tell me about the scope of your work while you were employed in the ERA campaign.
Well, the scope of my work,
you do?
Yeah, it had a lot to do with trying to figure out ways to influence people. I did not have the freedom to go to Springfield, although I did go down. And looking at the movie Fighting for the Obvious, I remember being horrified when I went down to Springfield and looking at these guys, essentially throwing spitballs at each other down there, and, could care less about, what was being talked about. I developed true disdain, going there.
What did you do? What was your goal?
But was to get people on the streets, and so we would do these. I refer to them. I don't think we've talked about them as this, but like guerrilla demonstrations, walking down the sidewalk, and all of a sudden people would come along and with picket signs and chanting, along Michigan or other parts where people would chant. I remember calling people up for that kind of duty.
Recruiting them to do
Exactly, recruiting them. I remember talking to other organizations to get them involved with the bigger demonstrations. And I remember the media work that we did, where we sat around the table to figure out which talk shows we should call up and what are the questions we wanted to pose, particularly if we knew the speakers in advance, and who's going to ask which questions. And when I think about that was pretty far-sighted at the time, but we would all be sitting at a phone bank and on hold for this particular talk show, and one person, would one person would speak with the host, then another person's would be picked up because we essentially flooded their lines. But it was a way that I discovered this is how you can influence public discussion. Because you give the impression that, hey, the public is thinking about these issues. So that was the other thing I feel pretty proud to have been a part of. And then of just, the camaraderie that I experienced working in the office.
It sounds like it was a good experience.
Absolutely. It was very much of a good experience. And, like everyone else, I was sad when the ERA did not pass. And I, held a lot of resentment towards George Ryan, who I felt was who single-handedly, I think, blocked the whole thing. And I thought it was just ironic that he ended up becoming governor. Tried to change his stripes during that time, but wasn't able to, and ended up going to jail, which, couldn't have happened to the fitting person.
I thought he redeemed himself a little on capital punishment.
Yeah. No, he
was an important thing for him to do.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, it was interesting to see how I think he knew what he did, and I think that could have been a result of it. Yeah.
So after that, when I presume you lost that job when the National Resources disappeared.
Yeah.
And did you stay involved in
not with women's
work?
But I stayed involved with not-for-profits. I think it pretty much in 82, I decided to go back to school and get my master's degree in 87, or maybe it was 85. And that was really one of the best decisions I made. I ended up working for Sara Lee Corporation, and I worked in their philanthropic office. And my job was to give money to women's organizations. Since Sara Lee is named after a woman, and they wanted to make sure that even though the local foundation gave to local charities, I had the freedom, I had a line item to give money to national women's organizations. And since I had some experience with that, I did it and I enjoyed it. So I think that the proximity between working at, as far as the timeline, with Sara Lee and leaving the women's organizations, is I still had some familiarity with that, and made sure that they got nice grants.
So what would you name as your most important accomplishments during your ERA campaign involvement?
Well, that's tough. I mean, being part of a team, I don't know if my work stood out as such. I mean, I'm one of the foot soldiers in many ways. I'm not a Mary June Collins, who was the leader and a great one at that. I think that trying to influence public opinion was probably the one that I remember the most. As far as any of the demonstrations, I was just, again, as I said, I was one of the foot soldiers.
How about personally? What do you feel that involvement accomplished for you personally?
It gave me a lot of confidence, and I was empowered. I was talking to Len Cantor, who did the movie, Fighting for the Obvious, and she said, when I knew you back in those days, you were known as Carol. Now you're known as Caroline. I said, well, that's the difference. I said that Caroline is a name, that was the name, one, that my mom gave me, and two, that's a name of empowerment, that don't call me. I mean, before I was kind of like, oh, just call me Carol. I was small, and now being larger, I decided now's the time for me to use my full name. And that's how I want to be called. Well, some of the memorable moments I have was just meeting people like Gloria Steinem, and being impressed of her fearlessness. I was just someone who she had just met, didn't have any particular relationship with her, but I remember trying to figure out where I was going to stay at a national conference in New York, and she said, you're welcome to stay with me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why would I do that? But anyway, I did not stay with her. But I was impressed that someone felt confident enough to have someone whom she did not know, but who was part of the cause, to make that offer. But I think that the biggest thing is I became empowered, and I went on to do things of leadership that I just wouldn't have imagined myself doing, like serving as speaking on television when I got my job with the city, representing the mayor, and with confidence, speaking or managing the summer jobs program, which hired 24,000 kids, and being that point person for that, and running it successfully. So those are the kinds of things that sort of started in its kernel. I mean, I always felt when I was married that my husband was the one who had all the knowledge and the know-how. I developed that on my own, and became that fully functioning leader personality that I was there. It was there when I was in that office, but it happened. It became fully bloomed, and
it's interesting, isn't it? How we sort of. I always felt that if you had an organization behind you or a cause behind you, you got out there and did things that you absolutely didn't believe you could do.
Right.
If somebody had said, "Are you going to do that?"
Exactly.
Whereas if it's pushing you, you do it,
and they took a chance on me. That Mac Chicago Now. I mean, they didn't know I could do anything. I didn't know I could do anything. But in that time, becoming leadership of the city and a speaker, and I mean, I've spoken to groups of there were 2,000 people in the room when I was at the podium. But I felt like I can do this, and did it, and began to sort of shape what the message should be, and all of that. The seeds were germinated at Chicago Now.
Have you been an activist since then, or think of yourself as an activist? Are there other areas of activism that you've been involved in?
Sure, there's
since
been other,
or now.
Not like the ERA. Probably more with education. But then I found that when I was in leadership positions, it's kind of different to be the activist. You'll actually have some power to shape policy. Now that I'm reaching the point in my life where I'm looking around and thinking, where's the best use of my skills? I'm looking at perhaps doing work around ageism. I think that's kind of another frontier. I'm looking at doing work around, not only ageism on a local level, but globally, because I think that it affects particularly women, are bear the brunt of being dismissed and diminished because of their age. But anyway, I'm in the process of trying to think through what my next act will be as I'm riding into the sunset. At least,
not yet, Carol. Not
at least from this place, anyway. My current space.
Anything else relevant that we haven't talked about?
Oh gosh, well, you pulled a lot out of me, which I mean, I've been fortunate to travel. A lot of it by myself. I've spent time in places that a lot of people have not been, especially, I was one of the early goers to China back in the 70s.
That is early.
And I've studied adult learning, workforce development. I'm proud of my accomplishment as a mother. Both of my children are activists. And I think that that's a wonderful mirror because I gave a lot of myself to them as they were growing up, and it's fun to hear my son talk about feminist ideas and trying to be sensitive. And my daughter, of course, is a leader in her own right. Last night I mentioned that not only has she been doing a lot of activist work, including going to the Peace Corps, but she saved my life. You know, when we were passing, we were in Brazil, and we were stopped by the border guards, you know, with machine guns pointed at us, and my daughter talked them out of it in Spanish, and I was thinking that's my girl. so she, you know, I'm very happy with my how my children have grown, and I see it as a wonderful legacy.